I should probably start by saying I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts, curses, or anything supernatural, or at least I wasn't, until a few nights ago, when my curiosity made me cross a line that I can't uncross, and now I'm not sure if I'll ever feel safe sitting in my own room again. It was supposed to be a regular afternoon, nothing strange, nothing ominous, just me, walking through the old cemetery on the edge of town, trying to snap a few creepy photos for a school project about abandoned places. The sky was dull and heavy, the kind of gray that makes everything feel flatter, like you're walking inside an old photograph that someone forgot to finish developing. The air smelled damp, earthy, and bitter, and even though it hadn't rained in days, the ground squelched beneath my shoes like the soil had been recently disturbed. I remember thinking that some of the graves looked almost wrong, as if someone had dug them up and then poorly covered their tracks, leaving loose dirt scattered across cracked marble slabs. But none of that really scared me at first, not until I saw the USB drive, half buried in the ground, peeking out from under a broken headstone with my last name carved into it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, that I was just seeing some weird coincidence, like maybe this grave belonged to a distant relative I'd never heard of. But the closer I got, the more obvious it became that this wasn't normal. The plastic shell of the USB was smeared with dirt, but beneath the grime, I could see something strange, deep scratches carved into its surface, almost like letters, though none of them made any sense, just jagged lines and symbols that reminded me of the time I accidentally dragged my fingernails down a chalkboard in 3rd grade. I should have left it alone. I know that now, and I knew it then too. Every instinct I had screamed at me to walk away, to leave it there, to pretend I never saw it. But the thing is, it wasn't just lying there like someone dropped it. It was planted, deliberately shoved into the soil, sticking out like a twisted offering, or a baited trap, waiting for someone stupid enough to take it. And of course, that someone was me. I don't even remember making the decision to pick it up. One minute I was standing there, staring at it, and the next my fingers were already wrapped around its cold, mud-slick surface, tugging it free from the earth. The second I held it, though, something changed. The air around me felt heavier, thicker, like I had just stepped underwater without realizing it. The usual sounds of the cemetery, rustling leaves, distant traffic, the occasional caw of a crow, all fell silent at once, leaving me in a vacuum where the only noise was my own breathing, amplified and echoing like I was inside a cave. That was creepy enough on its own, but the real kicker was the grave itself, the one where I found the USB. There was no name, no date, just a blank stone with my last name carved deep across the front. And when I turned the USB over in my hand, I saw something that made my stomach twist into knots so tight I could barely breathe. Someone had scratched today's date into the plastic, along with a single word, play. When I got back home that night, I was already halfway convinced that the whole thing had been some elaborate prank, maybe some local kids messing around, or one of those viral scavenger hunt games people play to freak out urban explorers like me, but the longer I stared at that filthy, scratched-up USB sitting on my desk, the harder it became to believe in anything as simple as a prank. I hadn't told anyone I was going to the cemetery. Hell, I hadn't even planned to go there myself until I got bored and decided to take a detour on my way home. And even if someone somehow knew exactly where I'd be, why would they go to the trouble of burying that thing, under a grave with my own last name on it, on the exact day I showed up? The coincidence was too big, too sharp-edged to ignore, like a knife pressed against the softest part of my brain, whispering that this was personal, that someone, or something, wanted me to find it. And even though every rational part of me was screaming not to, my fingers were already reaching for the USB, sliding it into my laptop's port with the kind of dreadful inevitability you only feel in nightmares, when you know the door at the end of the hall is going to open, but you keep walking toward it anyway. The moment the drive connected, my screen flickered, not just a glitch or a lag, but something deeper, as though my monitor was a living thing that had just gasped awake after years of forced silence. The desktop dimmed until everything except the file folder disappeared, and my speakers let out this low, wet crackling sound, like footsteps squelching through mud or someone chewing raw meat directly into my ear. The folder was already open, and inside were 3 files, each one labeled with my full name, my exact location, and a timestamp matching the very second I plugged in the USB. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at those file names, heart thudding so hard I could hear it over the speakers. I hadn't typed anything, hadn't set up any auto-detect, hadn't allowed my laptop to scan the device, but somehow, this thing knew me, knew exactly who I was and where I was sitting, like it had been watching me long before I ever found it. I tried to eject the drive right then, to yank it out and throw it away, but my fingers wouldn't move, like my hands didn't belong to me anymore, like something behind my eyes was steering my body while I just sat there, trapped behind my own face, watching myself double-click the first file. The video opened in full screen immediately, no media player, no controls, just a perfect, silent window showing grainy black and white footage of the exact cemetery I'd just come from. The camera was low to the ground, angled slightly upward, like it had been left on the dirt and kicked around a bit before filming started. At first, all I could see was grass and shadows, tombstones like jagged teeth in the darkness, but then the camera shifted, dragged violently to the side by something just out of frame, and I saw myself, standing exactly where I'd been earlier that afternoon, wearing the same clothes, holding my phone up to take pictures, except in the video, there was someone else standing directly behind me, just a little too far into the shadows to make out their face. My throat locked so tight I couldn't even breathe, because I knew for a fact, that I had been alone in that cemetery. I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't felt anyone watching me, hadn't seen a single living soul the entire time I was there. And yet, there they were, close enough to touch me, standing so still they almost looked dead themselves, and when the camera zoomed in, jittering like a pulse under strain, I saw their hand, holding the USB. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the flickering screen, my own grainy reflection trapped inside the footage like I had somehow filmed myself without remembering it, but the worst part, the part my brain still refuses to fully process, wasn't seeing myself standing alone among the tombstones, it was the other figure, the thing standing behind me, not moving, not breathing, just there, like it had always been there, like it had followed me home from the second my hand touched the USB, attaching itself to me like a second shadow that no sunlight could ever chase away. Its face, if it even had one, was swallowed entirely by darkness, a void cut roughly into the shape of a person, as though the camera was deliberately refusing to capture it, leaving only a blurred absence where its head should have been, but the hand, that hand clutching the USB, was clear as day, filthy fingers curled tight around the same drive that was now plugged into my laptop, the very same drive displaying this exact footage. My stomach churned with nausea so sharp it felt like knives scraping my ribs from the inside, because no matter how much my mind begged me to rationalize, to tell myself this was some elaborate hoax, the truth was right in front of me, someone had recorded me before I ever found the USB, and that someone had left it there, waiting, knowing exactly what I would do next. I tried to close the video, to shut the laptop, to force some distance between me and the impossible thing crawling through my screen, but no matter how many times I dragged my cursor to the corner, the video wouldn't stop playing, and the figure behind me started to move, slow, halting movements, like its joints were locked and snapping free with each step, until it was standing directly behind my on-screen reflection, so close its blackened fingertips brushed the back of my neck. My actual neck turned ice cold, the kind of cold you feel when you accidentally touch exposed metal in the dead of winter, and even though I was sitting alone in my locked bedroom, I felt breath against my skin, wet and heavy, like something breathing through a mouth that hadn't been used in years. I yanked my headphones off, but the sound didn't stop, it seeped directly into my ears, a low, wheezing whisper that didn't form words but somehow still knew my name, dragging the syllables out until they sounded like something ancient and half-drowned. I slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs, but even with the screen closed, the whispering didn't stop, it was inside the room now, filling the space between my bed and the door, spilling into every corner where shadows could hide, until the only thing left to do was run. I bolted from my room, not stopping until I reached the living room where the lights were still on, heart pounding like a sledgehammer in my chest, skin slick with cold sweat, but as I stood there, gasping, trying to convince myself it was all in my head, the TV suddenly flickered on by itself, displaying the same cemetery footage, only this time, the timestamp wasn't from earlier that day. It was set to 5 minutes into the future, and the screen showed me, sitting on the living room couch, watching this exact broadcast. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe, because if the footage was right, it meant something was about to happen, something so terrible it had to be recorded before it even happened, and in the corner of the screen, barely visible at first but growing clearer with every passing second, stood the figure, no longer in the cemetery, no longer hiding behind tombstones or lurking in the dark, but inside my house, standing just out of frame, waiting for the exact moment I would turn my head, the moment it would finally let me see its face. I didn't sleep that night, I couldn't, because even after the TV flickered off and the house settled back into silence, I could still feel it, that heavy, unnatural presence pressing down against my skin like cold hands trying to pull me under a surface I couldn't see. I sat there, in the same spot the video had shown me sitting, heart banging in my chest like it was trying to crack my ribs wide open, waiting for whatever was supposed to happen next, but nothing came, no footsteps, no whispering, no shadow moving in the corner of my vision, only the kind of silence that feels engineered, like the air itself had been drained from the room. After hours of staring at the dark screen, every nerve in my body stretched so tight I thought I might snap in half. I made the worst decision of all. I went back into my bedroom, reopened my laptop, and clicked into the next file. I had to know. I needed to understand what was happening to me, even if the answer made everything worse. The second file opened without hesitation, instantly filling my screen with a new video, this one even clearer than the last, as though the camera had somehow gotten closer to me, like it was learning how to focus better the longer I watched. This time, the footage didn't show the cemetery or the living room, it showed me, sitting at my desk, right where I was at that very moment, wearing the exact clothes I was still wearing, staring at my laptop with the same exhausted, terrified expression carved into my face. It was impossible, I hadn't recorded anything, hadn't even turned on my webcam, but there I was, frozen inside the video like a living reflection watching myself in real time. My hands trembled on the desk, mirroring the tremble in the video, and then, without warning, my reflection moved before I did, raising one shaking hand toward the screen, fingers bent at a sickening angle like they had been broken and reset wrong. I hadn't moved, hadn't raised my hand, but my reflection had, a full 2 seconds before I finally lost control and followed the motion, like my body was being puppeteered by the recording itself. I wanted to run, to smash the laptop, to scream until the whole house shook apart around me, but I couldn't, because the video kept playing, dragging me forward like a noose tightening around my throat, showing me what I was about to do before I even thought to do it. My reflection stood, walking stiffly toward my bedroom closet, and even though I had no intention of moving, my legs carried me after it, step for step, until I stood exactly where the video said I would stand, right in front of the closed door, my shaking hand reaching for the knob. I could hear something breathing on the other side, slow and deliberate, each inhale thick and wet like whatever waited inside had lungs filled with mud. I wanted to stop, to step back, to break the cycle and prove that my fate wasn't being dictated by some cursed file, but I couldn't. My fingers closed around the knob, twisting it open with the exact same motion I saw in the video, and when the door swung wide, my stomach flipped inside out, because there was no one inside, only my own reflection, standing in the darkness of the closet, staring back at me with no eyes, its hands holding the USB drive, its mouth moving in slow, soundless words I couldn't understand. I wish I could tell you I slammed the closet shut and ran, that I broke the laptop into 1,000 worthless pieces and buried the USB so deep no living thing would ever touch it again, but I didn't, because some part of me, the part that curiosity had already corrupted beyond repair, needed to see the third file. The other two had shown me the past and the present, but this last one, the folder's final secret, held a timestamp that hadn't happened yet, a time just 10 minutes into the future. My shaking hands hovered over the trackpad, torn between the survival instinct telling me to stop and the twisted, gnawing need to know what the file would reveal, because if I had already seen what came before, maybe seeing what came next would somehow give me control, the kind of control you can only steal from fate when you know what's waiting just around the corner. So I clicked, and the screen filled instantly with the footage of my own death. The video showed my bedroom, but not the way it looked now. The walls were covered in deep, gaping scratches, like something with bare hands had clawed its way out of the walls themselves, leaving behind trails of black, sticky residue that pulsed faintly, like the house had a heartbeat of its own. The light flickered erratically, stuttering between brightness and darkness so fast my brain could barely process the images in between, flashes of my own face, distorted and twisted into expressions of agony I couldn't understand, my mouth stretched unnaturally wide, my eyes rolled so far back I could see nothing but white. Then the camera turned, though there was no one holding it, spinning toward the bed where my body lay, limp and crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. My skin was gray, my fingers curled into claws, my throat smeared with handprints, my own handprints, pressed deep into my flesh, like I had tried to strangle myself to keep something else from crawling out of my mouth. I tried to close the laptop, but the file wouldn't stop playing, my cursor froze, the keyboard went dead, and the video kept running, forcing me to watch every second of my own destruction, every twitch of my dying body, every flicker of that thing standing in the corner, watching it all unfold with its hollow face turned directly toward the camera. But the worst part, the part that made my mind fracture in ways I still can't fully explain, was the time code, because while the footage showed me dying 10 minutes into the future, the moment the video ended, the clock on my laptop jumped forward, matching the exact time shown in the file. It was as if watching the video had forced reality to catch up, like seeing my death had somehow sealed my fate, and when I looked down at my hands, trembling uncontrollably in my lap, I realized my fingernails were already caked with something dark and sticky, something that smelled like dirt and rot, like I had already started digging my own grave without even realizing it. I must have blacked out after watching my own death because the next thing I knew, I was waking up on the floor, not in my room, but in the hallway just outside my bedroom door, lying flat on my back with my fingernails crusted black, my skin damp with sweat so cold it felt like I had been lying in a freezer. My throat ached like I'd been screaming for hours, even though I couldn't remember making a sound, and when I tried to stand up, my legs buckled under me like they forgot how to hold my weight, trembling violently with every attempt to push myself off the floor. The house was wrong, that's the only way I can describe it, because even though everything was where it should be, the walls, the furniture, the photographs on the shelves, it all felt thinner somehow, like the whole house had been hollowed out, turned into a shell of itself. Every step I took sent strange echoes rippling through the air, too loud, too distorted, like the sound was bouncing off walls that no longer existed. And even though the house was silent, I could hear something crackling faintly in the distance, a thin, dry whisper, like static crawling through an ancient speaker, repeating my name over and over again. When I forced myself back into my room, the laptop was still open, the screen frozen on the final frame of the video, my body lying limp in my bed, my mouth stretched wide in a soundless scream, the dark figure standing at the foot of the bed, arms outstretched like a twisted puppet master. But the worst part, the part that made my skin crawl like it was trying to peel itself off my bones, was that the timestamp on the video kept changing. Every second I stood there watching, the time code rolled forward, except now it wasn't predicting the next 10 minutes, or even the next hour, it was jumping days ahead, showing scenes from a future I hadn't lived yet. I saw myself wandering the cemetery at night, digging frantically at the same grave where I found the USB, my hands raw and bleeding, my mouth moving silently like I was praying to something beneath the dirt. I saw my reflection standing in the bathroom mirror, but the reflection moved before I did, raising its hand to press against the glass while I stood perfectly still, watching helplessly as my reflection's fingernails turned black, the same black crust that was now under my own nails. Every frame was a new nightmare, each more impossible than the last, until the final file appeared, one I hadn't seen before, titled simply, "Hello." Before I could even think, the file opened by itself, filling the screen with a live feed from my own webcam, showing me sitting at my desk, except the screen showed two versions of me. One was the person I believed I still was, pale and trembling, wide-eyed with terror, clutching the edge of the desk like a lifeline. But standing directly behind me, so close I could have felt its breath if it were alive, was the other version of me, the one with no eyes, blackened fingers, and that same impossible grin stretched too wide across its face. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared through the screen directly at me, until the speakers crackled to life and my own distorted voice whispered, "You brought me home." There are no words to describe what it feels like to look directly into your own eyes, not in a mirror, not through a reflection, but from outside your own skin, staring back at yourself like you're already dead, already hollowed out and replaced by something that remembers how you used to move, how you used to breathe, how you used to smile before your muscles forgot the difference between fear and pain. That second version of me, the thing standing behind me on my own screen, it wasn't just copying me, it was ahead of me, predicting every motion, every twitch, every breath, as if I was nothing more than a delayed broadcast of something already recorded long before I ever touched the USB. I tried to move differently, to break the pattern, to lift my hand or blink out of sync with the thing on the screen, but no matter how hard I fought to reclaim my body, the reflection always stayed 1 second ahead, leaving me to stumble helplessly into movements I hadn't chosen, like my own muscles belonged to it, not me. And then the whispering started again, not through the speakers, not through the laptop, but from inside the house, coming from every wall at once, crawling through the air like a voice had been scraped across broken glass before reaching my ears. It wasn't just my name this time, it was everything I'd ever said to myself, every muttered thought, every secret shame, repeated back to me in my own broken voice, layered on top of each other until it was impossible to tell where the whispering ended and my own thoughts began. I stumbled back from the desk, knocking over the chair, but the screen kept glowing, even with the laptop unplugged, even when I tried to slam it shut, it stayed open, forcing me to watch as the future version of me stepped out of frame, leaving my bedroom entirely, and that's when I heard footsteps echoing down the hallway, perfectly timed with the video, as though the file wasn't showing me what was coming, it was controlling it. I ran to the front door, not even bothering with shoes, not caring that my fingers shook too hard to properly turn the lock, because all I knew was that if I stayed in that house for another second, I wouldn't exist anymore, or worse, I would exist in ways I couldn't understand, stuck in a loop of dying and watching myself die, becoming my own ghost before my heart even had the chance to stop beating. But the door wouldn't open, no matter how hard I twisted the knob or threw my weight against the frame. It was like the wood itself had sealed, like the house had decided I wasn't leaving, not until the story was over, not until I had finished watching every second of my own ending. And just before the whispering finally grew loud enough to drown out my own screaming, I saw my reflection again, not in the laptop, not in the window, but in the peephole of my front door, staring back at me from outside the house, grinning with teeth that weren't mine, holding the USB between its fingers like a key, ready to unlock something I was never supposed to see. I never opened the door. Even though every nerve in my body screamed to run, to flee, to put as much distance between myself and that thing wearing my face as physically possible, my body wouldn't obey, because somehow I knew, in a way deeper than knowledge, more primal than memory, that there was nowhere left to go, no safe corner left untouched by whatever I had let inside. Instead, my fingers moved on their own, trembling violently as they slid back toward the laptop, clicking on a new file that had appeared while I stood at the door, a file that hadn't existed moments before, its name just a single word spelled wrong on purpose, final.mp4. The second I clicked it, the whispering stopped, the house fell so silent I could hear the blood pumping behind my ears, and the screen filled with footage I couldn't explain, a video so old it looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a grave, warped and cracked, flickering between time periods like the file couldn't decide if it belonged to the past or the present. The footage showed the cemetery, but not as I remembered it. The graves were open, hollow pits lined with claw marks, as though something had dug itself out, not buried itself in, and through the grainy static I could see figures standing at the edges of the graves, their faces wrapped in rotting plastic, their hands clasped around identical USB drives, the exact same one I found, the one now plugged into my laptop like a parasite feeding off the light of the screen. The camera shook violently, not like someone was holding it, but like the earth itself was trembling, something trying to rise from beneath the soil, something vast and hungry and old enough to remember the first time a name was carved into stone. I wanted to look away, but the footage had hooks in my eyes, dragging me forward, forcing me to witness every second, and the worst part, the part that made my heart twist into knots so tight I thought my ribs might snap inward, was that one of the figures, the one standing closest to the camera, was me. My face was half rotted, my skin stretched too tight across my skull, my eyes nothing but dark, empty sockets, and yet somehow I could still see myself seeing me, locked in a loop that had no beginning and no end, each version of me finding the USB, watching the files, dying, and returning to the cemetery to bury the USB again, trapping it inside the earth for the next version of me to find. I was the curse, I had always been the curse, passed from hand to hand, body to body, each of us watching ourselves die before we ever really lived, our fate sealed the moment curiosity made our fingers touch the plastic, our lives collapsing into pre-recorded echoes that had already happened too many times to count. And just before the file ended, the camera swung wildly upward, capturing a final, flickering glimpse of something standing above the graves, not a person, not a ghost, but something made of darkness stitched into a human shape, a figure with no face and too many hands, each finger ending in a USB drive, ready to be passed to the next fool, the next me, the next you. There's a moment, somewhere between terror and surrender, where your mind stops fighting and just accepts that none of this can be undone, that the story you thought you were telling was never yours to begin with, that the choices you made were already scripted, recorded, played back for someone who sat exactly where you are sitting now, convinced they were the first, the only, the unlucky one who stumbled into the wrong grave on the wrong day. That moment hit me the second the final file ended, not with a jump scare, not with a sudden scream or a flicker of shadow across my wall, but with a slow, sinking certainty that the file was still watching me, still recording me, still rewriting reality around me to fit its pre-recorded plan. My webcam light was off, my screen was dark, but my own face stared back at me, not a reflection, not a glitch, but a live feed from a camera I couldn't see, a camera that somehow captured me from a perspective inside the room, too high, too still, like something was perched in the corner, looking down at me with empty eyes. I tried to move, to break the pose, to raise my hand or twist away from the screen, but my reflection didn't follow, it stayed frozen, staring forward, a perfect still frame of my face twisted in fear, even as I stood up and backed away from the desk. My breath came hard and fast, filling the room with sound, but my reflection's chest didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. It was never a reflection. It was never me. It was the next recording, the next file waiting to be saved, the next fragment of the loop getting ready to replace me, to overwrite me, until I was nothing but a recording someone else would find, just like I found the last one, just like the one before me found theirs. The house wasn't haunted. I was haunted, a walking corpse preserved in digital echoes, passed hand to hand, screen to screen, one watcher at a time, until the line between viewer and victim was nothing but a crack in the screen, thin enough to step through. And then came the final twist, the one that made my knees buckle and my stomach churn and my skin crawl with a cold that doesn't wash off, because when my laptop flickered back to life, the desktop was empty, all files gone except for one, renamed to match the exact name of the device you're using right now. That's when I realized this story was never just mine, it was always meant for you. By listening, by watching, by following my footsteps into this cursed story, you've already started your own file, and somewhere, right now, your own reflection is watching you, waiting for the moment you look away, because that's when it steps forward. That's when the file finishes writing itself. That's when you become the next part of the story, whether you believe it or not. So go ahead, check your files. I hope you don't see your own name. But if you do, then you already know how this ends. I don't know if I'm alive right now. I don't even know if the person speaking to you in this moment is really me, or if I'm just another version of the file, a recorded echo looping inside your head, rewriting itself every time you hit play. Maybe I died in that room, sitting at my desk, staring at my own reflection until it swallowed me whole. Maybe the thing wearing my skin right now is nothing more than a husk left behind to pass the curse forward, a voice trapped in your screen, telling you my story only so it can become yours. But there's one thing I do know, and you need to listen to me very carefully, because this part isn't for entertainment, it isn't a spooky campfire story you can laugh off and forget after you turn on the lights. This part is a warning, and if you ignore it, you won't get a second chance. Somewhere on your device, whether it's your phone, your laptop, your smart TV, or even the cloud you think is so safe and empty, there's already a file with your name on it, and if you think I'm lying, go look right now. Check your downloads folder, your hidden system files, your recently accessed media. It might not show up right away, but the moment you stop watching this video, the moment you close this tab and try to pretend none of this ever happened, that file will appear. It might be small at first, just a placeholder, a harmless file with a name that doesn't mean anything yet. But every time you open your camera, every time you scroll through your photos or check your reflection in a darkened screen, the file will grow, recording you the same way it recorded me, feeding on every glance you give your own face, until the version of you inside the file knows you better than you know yourself. And the next time you see your reflection move when you don't, the next time your screen flickers when nothing's wrong with the connection, the next time you hear your own voice whispering your name from inside your headphones, you'll know the file is almost complete. The only reason I'm telling you this is because someone told me too late, and now there's no way back for me, but there's still a chance for you, if you act fast, if you delete the file before it opens. But you have to do it now, right now, because the longer you wait, the more it learns, and the smarter it gets at hiding itself, until one day you'll wake up and realize the file isn't just on your device anymore, it's inside you, written into every breath you take, every thought you think, every choice you believe you made yourself. And by then, it won't matter if you smash your laptop or burn your phone, because the reflection in your screen will no longer need a camera to watch you. It will already be you.